Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Dave Sutton.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to start off by, first of all, thanking Leslie and Chris and Paula and Kelly and the whole brand team for inviting me to participate in this event. It's actually my first opportunity to attend a PBS annual meeting, so I'm really looking forward to that. Also wanted to let you guys know that for the past roughly year and a half, I've been working closely with the PBS brand team in Arlington, really trying to get our arms around the brand and brand health specifically. So when I was working on putting this presentation together, I was thinking kind of in the context of how could storytelling or maybe unpacking some of the things that Jonah Berger just described to us, how can we get more tactical around what makes a great story, what are some of the common elements of a great story, and hopefully give you some things to take away at the end of this presentation to begin thinking about how you can weave storytelling into some of the activities that you're undertaking currently as marketers at your station. So that's really kind of the backdrop of this. I also wanted to introduce one other person before I start off, and that's Bill Fasig from our team is actually sitting in the back. I like to bring other people to these events with me because sometimes we get a lot of questions and a lot of things that come up afterwards. So Bill's here to help network and support Q&A, not only after this session, but we're going to be here, I guess, until about Wednesday. The thing you need to know about Bill is he's a recovering brand marketer from Apple. So I'm sure many of you will have some interesting questions. He lived through, I think you were there, he was there during the Scully days, and then when Jobs came back, so he was kind of on the forefront of the Think Different campaign, if you guys remember that. But Bill's just a great friend, a great colleague, and a great brain to pick when it comes to what constitutes great storytelling. So with that, let me start off by, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my background, and I'm going to use a lot of examples today, hopefully to try to bring some of these ideas home for you. And I will warn you up front that actually Chris and I were talking about this presentation a couple weeks ago in the office. He kind of guided me away from using too many PBS examples. So I want to get it out right up front. I'm not going to use a lot of PBS examples. I'm going to use other examples. But I am a huge Downton Abbey fan. I am a huge Sherlock fan. I am a huge Nova fan. So I didn't want you to take away from this presentation that, oh, this guy Sutton only watches AMC and Discovery Channel and whatever. I actually watch a lot of different programming. And I also really have a great passion for storytelling and great brand stories in particular. So I'm going to start off with giving you a little bit of story about what kind of motivates me right now. And one of the things that I cannot miss on Sunday nights is the show Mad Men. Anybody in the room a Mad Men fan? If you're a marketer, you probably have at least seen this show, and you may know quite a bit about the storyline. It is obviously a fictitious ad agency that's set in the 1960s, early 60s, late 60s, and it really tells the story of the Mad Men, the Madison Avenue, really the birth of the advertising industry, the marketing industry that many of us practice today. And the reason why I love this, not only is it great story writing, Matt Weiner's the producer who brought us The Sopranos, if anybody was a Sopranos fan. Great story writing, great drama, just enough solicitous sex and flesh and alcoholic behaviors to make it interesting and intriguing. But the thing that I love about it is it also has a lot of the markers of a great period piece, right? It talks a lot about things that were going on in the 60s, and it's fairly true to what happened at the birthing, if you will, of the advertising and the marketing industry. And so I like to refer to examples from the show, mainly because a lot of it's still very relevant today. And also there's a lot of things that, as you'll hear today, that are baked into our DNA as marketers that can sometimes work against us, right? When we think about this new environment, the environment of social currency, for example, that Jonah Berger described in his talk. You know, social currency today has a whole different dynamic than it did in the 1960s. One of my favorite quotes from the very first episode, actually it was the first season, it was like the 6th episode, was when Don Draper of the Sterling Cooper agency is quoted, was asked, you know, kind of, why are you in the advertising industry? Why is that advertising industry so important? And his quote is something basically along these lines. People want to be told what to do so badly that they'll listen to anyone. And if you think back in the 1960s and the birth of the advertising industry, advertising and marketing was all about persuasion. wasn't about storytelling in the context we were describing earlier today. It was in the context of telling a story to motivate people to do something, buy your product, buy your service, tell their friends about your product and service. Very one-directional, right? So fast forward to today, right? And the environment that we work in today, another one of my favorite authors, in addition to Jonah Berger's book, who we'll talk more about that a little bit later, Seth Godin, who for those of you in the room that are marketers, probably I've read every Godin book, and they're all packed with kind of great ideas and controversial things. He got a lot of flack when this book came out, and you can probably imagine why, but by the way, he quickly, in the second printing, we kind of went in a different direction with this book, right? But the essence of the book didn't change, the content didn't change. But Seth Godin says, the reality is that, yes, in the day of Mad Men, it wasn't always about telling the truth. It was about where the truth lies, right? The tagline of the show itself. Today, it's about all great marketers really need to be storytellers. They really need to be thinking in the context of the story and the art of the story. And in our practice at TopRight, we talk a lot about with our clients about having a simple, clear, direct, emotional story to connect you with your audience. And ideally, to connect your audience with others, right? With an environment, though, where the truth is elusive, right? Where the truth is not, who can honestly say that they know everything about, what Starbucks puts into their coffee that makes it so addictive, or everything about that service that you purchase on behalf of your company? The reality is that the truth is elusive, and it's not so much the truth about the product or the truth about the service or what it delivers value, but the story that we tell as consumers that brings that brand to life, right? So it's the value we get out of that product, how we use that product, the utility of that product is really what Seth Godin is talking about when he says the truth needs to be in the context of stories, and those stories are told by our consumers, by our viewers, by our donors, and those are the stories that bring life to the brand. You've got to tell it with a purpose. We'll talk a lot about this today as well. And just remember that all great marketers are also great storytellers. And what we've done for the presentation today is kind of give you a little bit of a framework to understand the markers of a great story. Now, keep in mind that this is not a comprehensive, storytelling 101 workshop. In fact, Andrew Lindeman's going to be going through this a little bit later today to give you some more tactical capabilities around storytelling. But I wanted to kind of share with you today the foundational pieces of what makes a great story. Now, some of this will sound intuitive, right? And the best storytellers do this without even thinking about it. But for those of us that may not be great storytellers or may be aspiring great storytellers, sometimes it's good to throttle back and think about, in your own business, in your own life, in your own experience as a consumer, what constitutes a great story. And just like Jonah said this morning, everything begins with your message, right? And I would argue that it's not just a message that's sort of, again, one-directional. It's a message that's founded in a mythology, an ideology, a purpose that people as consumers can identify with. It's that message in a bottle, right? It's that compelling story, that compelling reason to believe, that compelling reason to buy, to talk about a brand. And along with the mythology, we also need to have compelling characters. So the way to bring the myth to life, the way to bring the story to life, is to have conflict and compelling relationships between people, right? The classic stories that inspire people, there's always a villain, right? There's always a hero. There may be supporters and beneficiaries and benefactors that surround that compelling group of characters. But without that element, without that component, a story ends up sounding like it's sort of a dead-end message that never really comes to life, right? The third piece is all inspiring stories. Think about any story that you've heard as a child, any story that you've told to your friends over a dinner conversation or a cocktail party. There's always at the core some battle, some conflict, some emotion that's at stake. There's a need to overcome adversity. There's a need to regain harmony. And so it's important to remember, and we'll talk a lot about emotion today, because I know Jonah didn't have a chance to get to this in the book, but in the Contagious book, he talks a lot about not just emotion for emotion's sake, but emotion that actually triggers action. So it's the concept of triggering and the concept of getting people to do something or feeling the emotion so deeply that they actually own it and want to be responsible for action associated with that emotion. And then finally, when you put it all together, every great brand, and I'm going to give you some really cool examples today of this, but every great brand evolves into and lives into a signature story. What I mean by that is it's a story that everybody identifies with. It's a story that when you see the brand, the first thing you think of, like for example, if I said Volvo, we were talking about cars earlier, what does Volvo stand for? Safety, right? Their signature storyline is safety. Now, I could tell you facts that, from an NTSB ratings perspective, they're not always the safest car, right? They're not. They're certainly safer than Toyotas, right? But they're not always the safest car, right? But they have built an identity. They have built a story which embodies the concept of safety. And we'll talk about some additional brands, but when you're thinking about branding your station and telling stories about your station to your audience and into your community, remember this is all in service of trying to land on your signature story, which, by the way, can also be part of that much bigger signature story that Rob talked about this morning, which is staking your claim, right? From a public broadcasting service perspective, you're all part of that claim to begin with. Now, how do we take that story and activate it locally, theme of this conference, to bring that to life in the community? So we'll talk a lot about the signature story, because I think that's a key part of what makes or constitutes turning brand stories into action and results. Let me go back, and I'm going to go through each of those boxes in a little more detail, but I wanted to start with this idea of myth, because I think myth and message is something that most marketers understand intuitively. What is it you stand for? What is it that you're communicating to your customers that you essentially want to stake your claim around, that you own? One of my favorite shows right now on Discovery Channel is actually Mythbusters. Any Mythbusters fans in here? What makes Mythbusters so fun, I think? I mean, it's kind of a completely strange show, if you really think about it. But it is engaging, and it's engaging because they've done a very good job. If you watch any Mythbusters show, for those that are not Mythbusters fans, basically what these guys do is they come in and they try to either validate or debunk, what I call mythology and urban legends, right? So the one everybody in the room probably has seen on YouTube 1 billion times is, when you drop a Mentos into a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi, it shoots to the moon, right? And they basically, obviously, a lot of people when those videos first came out, they thought, oh, they just made that. There's something else besides Pepsi in that bottle, right, that makes this thing shoot out. Well, it turns out that it actually is true. It does really happen. There's a chemical reaction that goes on. So what these guys do is they basically unpack a myth. And the script of the show is it's always the same. Even when they've now brought in some of their minions, some of their other Mythbusters into the process, the basic exposing of the myth or the decomposing of the myth kind of revolves around these 4 story parts, right? The beginning is there's an explanation of the myth. There's an explanation of something in the world that is either true or untrue, works or doesn't work, right? An urban legend is revealed. The second part is about bringing meaning to that. So why should I care, right? Why does this matter to me? What is the meaning in my life? What is the meaning to my family, to my community, whatever? But what's the meaning associated with this myth? The third part is then the show is a series, it's a narrative that goes from basically documenting some assumptions, both good and bad assumptions, documenting truths, and documenting big lies, right? That's basically what the program is about. And through that process, they land on basically it's a ritual at the end of the show, which is, truth, lie, fact, fiction. Do we debunk it or do we prove it? Do we validate it? And so there's kind of this, closure as a viewer at the end that this is what the myth was, it's really not true, or it is true, and here's why. So I thought why I use that as an example is I wanted to show you a very specific campaign that's running right now that I think is particularly brilliant for a lot of different reasons that we'll talk about after I show you the clip, but mainly because it actually is exposing, it's putting on display, it's putting on trial a myth. And you'll note that obviously this is a brand which most all of us are very familiar with, the Dove health and beauty products lines. But watch this clip and put yourself in the mindset of what myth are they trying to debunk, right? And what action are they trying to encourage from the audience?
I'm a forensic artist, worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
Kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. It couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.
Okay, how many people have actually seen that campaign or pieces of it? I mean, I just took one. There's actually a whole series of these and actually some deep reviews of some of those women on one-on-ones. Let's use our myth tool that the Mythbusters use to break this down. What are they trying to explain? Just anybody. Yeah, exactly. The myth that they're trying to put out there is that society, right, has influenced women to think that they're not as beautiful as they really are. That's kind of the explanation if you kind of use the Mythbusters model. What's the meaning for the women in the audience? What's the takeaway on this? Yeah, I mean, you're much more beautiful than you think, right? And there's different ways that other people interpret or view your story, right? The way you project yourself. And we probably shouldn't be as critical of ourselves as we are. Who's the hero in this myth. Who's the Hercules in this myth, right? You think the sketch artist? That's interesting. I've never heard that one before. Yeah. The participants are the hero. How much different would this story have been if the punchline was, Dove makes you more beautiful? That's what they would have done in Mad Men days, right? It would sort of been about, buy more Dove, buy more health and beauty products from Dove. Taking a page out of Jonah Berger's book, what's the social currency here? I know we just talked about that briefly, but what is this all about? It's about self-esteem, exactly right. It's about, and in fact, this went viral. This has been going viral. And my argument, again, I don't have the data like Jonah does to kind of say this is why this has gone viral. But the ritual associated with this video is that people are looking at it, they're sending it to their friends, and it's become an act of self-esteem, an act of defiance. That I'm taking a stand for the fact that, the way we define beauty, the way we define it in our society, I disagree with for these reasons, right? It's a very powerful story. Well, by all reports, I mean, Dove, there are no other shampoo products, health and beauty products that have gone viral with anything, as far as I know. As far as I think they're number one in terms of brand market share right now. Now, I don't have the data on what they were before this campaign or what they are after, but to this point, I mean, by all accounts, it's had a dramatic impact on the results of their business. Let me move to the next part of unpacking this framework. Heroes and villains. Every story has to have great characters, great compelling reasons to pay attention to the story, right? And the people in the story really embody the messaging. I think one of the biggest mistakes, and the reason I asked you the question about who's the hero in the Dove commercial, the number one mistake that people make is they try to make the brand the hero. And in fact, if you think back to the early days of advertising and the quote that I gave you from Don Draper, the thinking for many, many years has been that the brand is the hero because the brand is solving consumer needs, wants, and problems, right? So by default, that means the brand has to be the hero on the white horse coming in to save the day. And the problem with that, of course, is that in today's environment, consumers are much more sophisticated. Right? In the 60s, there wasn't a lot of advertising, so advertising was kind of a novelty unto itself. Right? Today, there's so many, we get bombarded by thousands and thousands of messages every day. And so it's become critically important if you want to be differentiated, you want to stand out from the crowd. Most of us have actually gotten to the point where we just tune out brand hero messages. We think they're arrogant. We think that they're not differentiated. And as Jonah said in his presentation, there's also the factor of trust. We're much more likely to trust if, for example, if Kelly recommended to me a restaurant in Arlington, Virginia, I'm much more likely to believe Kelly than I would any advertising or even some posting on Yelp, because I now have a bias that I think Yelp is all pre-programmed feedback. It's not real, it's by the restaurant owners, it's not by people like me, right? So what's happened is there's been a massive shift. And one of the challenges for you as storytellers in your local markets is how do you go from being probably having a perspective, or maybe your audience views you as talking about yourself more than you're talking about them, right? And that's natural. But more importantly, what is your role? Right? So I love to talk about the Wizard of Oz as a good metaphor for this. Who's the hero in the Wizard of Oz? Shout it out. Dorothy, right. Who's the villain? The Wicked Witch. Why? Because she landed her house on her sister and killed her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East, right? Who can tell me what Glenda's role is? Who's Glenda? What does she do? She just pops in and out every once in a while, right? She's a foil. That's good, Jim. She's a foil between good and evil. That's certainly a role. What else is she? She's a guide. She's a mentor, right? She doesn't go with Dorothy. How many of you, when the first time you ever saw Wizard of Oz when you were a child, wanted Glenda to escort Dorothy to see the wizard, right? Why doesn't she do that? Because it's not a good story, right? She wouldn't encounter the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion and other mentors or other folks on her quest to get back home. This is the challenge that I see for us as marketers, is how do we move from being known as brand heroes or positioning brands historically as being heroes to being brand mentors. And I'm going to show you a clip. This is a brand that I think has done a particularly good job, Frito-Lay Doritos brand, at moving and rotating from being historically a hero in their advertising to now being a mentor. And some of you may recognize this commercial as well.
Hi. Aw, thank you. Have a seat. Kyle, Jalen. Jalen, Kyle. Jalen, you play nice. I'll be right back.
What's going on, little man? I see you got your game skills down, Pack. You might have your hands full once I'll pick up the controller, little man.
Put it back. Keep your hands on my mama. Keep your hands on my Doritos.
Jalen, are you playing nice?
Does anybody know the backstory on this commercial? 2010 Super Bowl. Nobody knows the story on this? This is actually, the Doritos folks are brilliant, really. Starting in 2008, they started a contest. And every year around the Super Bowl, they basically solicit nominations, solicit submissions from amateur film producers, amateur commercial producers across the country. And they promise that one of them will air on the Super Bowl. The winner will air on the Super Bowl. In fact, there are actually usually anywhere from 6 to 10 winners, some of which get aired in the Super Bowl, some of which don't. This was actually the winner in 2010, or one of the winners in 2010. And what I find is fascinating about this is that Doritos basically just turned over the brand. They gave some assets and some guidance. I don't think there was even a brief that went to these guys, but turned over the brand and said, you tell us your story, right? You tell us how we should position Doritos, right? How we should tell a story in the marketplace. And so in doing so, they've essentially created Doritos not as Doritos isn't the hero. It's sort of just a one product shot in the whole mix of things, right? But it is the mentor, right? It is the mentor to, in this case, commercial film producers, wannabe amateur film producers. And also it's a great embodiment of how Doritos have become part of this family's lifestyle, right? And it's very important to that child that no one touches his Doritos. Just, I think, a fascinating way of thinking about the brand as a mentor. The classic case of this, and a brand that really, I think, has, I could attribute a lot of their success to the fact that they made a very deliberate plan when they created their story. Their story is founded in purpose. It's not a story about selling shoes. It's a story about providing for those who don't have shoes and providing for the health and well-being of children around the world. The Tom's brand is a great example of a storytelling brand where the audience is the hero. Every time you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, you or for your family, you're providing on a one-for-one basis a pair of shoes for a child somewhere in the world that needs those shoes, right? And they've now expanded this into other services, other healthcare, other support for families around the world. What makes it so unique is that it's the Tom's brand is really not the hero. The audience is the hero. And Tom's has really, again, become the mentor. Tom's is the mentor within the story that essentially guides audiences to a win-win. I think one of the great things, great takeaway for today for you is, keep in mind that stories used to be told, right? We tell stories. It goes back to the earliest days of humankind. We sat around campfires and told stories to each other. And those stories, obviously, like the myths that we were describing earlier, had meaning and had ritual associated with them. I think in the environment that we are now in, it's insufficient to just tell a story. It's a container. It's not actionable necessarily, right? And so one of the key points, and I'll reiterate this towards the end of my talk, I think we're moving from a place where we tell stories to where we live stories. And the challenge for all of us as brand marketers and brand storytellers is, how do you live into your brand story, not just tell stories? And the reason why that's so important is that in this very digitally enabled, transparent world that we live in today, consumers see everything we do. So if there's any discrepancy between the surface or what Jonah Berger calls in his book the Trojan horse view, right? The surface layer of your story, and when you peel back that story, if there's anything that's not genuine or authentic to back it up, meaning your service levels, your people, your programming, however you deliver value under your brand, if there's even one thing a kilter, one thing off, people will see it. And so it becomes very important not just to tell stories, but to live those stories. The other key lesson that I'll share with you, and again, I know Jonah didn't go much into emotion, but emotion is absolutely the cornerstone of a great story. But think about it. It's not enough that a story makes you laugh, or it makes you cry, or it makes you pound your fist in anger. It's insufficient, because the reality is it's just a moment in time. You may never do anything about that, right? So just eliciting emotion from people in and of itself does not a good story make. Another way to think about this is in our industry, in the media industry, and broadly speaking, many brands have learned that just entertaining people, making them happy, making them laugh, making them cry, is not necessarily a path to success. It may not earn you better ratings. It may not earn you better ad buy rates. It may not distinguish you, because everyone's clamoring to be entertaining. In our brand health work, we found that everybody wants to be entertaining. So what happens is it just looks like a cluster of people trying to be entertaining, and nobody really stands out from the pack. So my challenge to you is, as a storyteller, we have to move from entertaining people to engaging people, to move from just lighting up their emotions, hitting them with ideas and with concepts, to actually influencing action. I'm going to give you a very specific case example from a completely different industry here in a second, but the way we look at it in our businesses, it's insufficient just to light up emotions. You also have to map those to very specific influence triggers, right? And again, this is a part of the Contagious book we didn't get time to go through today, but where emotion and triggers come together, we call those influence triggers. Now, I put 5 on the page. There's actually many more. This kind of gets at the psychology of what motivates people to act on their emotions. So I'm not going to go through that level of detail today, but I wanted to give you sort of 5 examples of what I'm talking about, because at the highest level, a great story is actually pressing or pulling one of these triggers. It's about combining a complex idea with an emotion and with a path or a ritual, right, to act. So let me give you the example. The case example here is something we're all in this room familiar with. Jonah actually used Geico as an example in his presentation as well. Auto insurance right now, actually all insurance products that are bought online have become the melting pot of advertising and storytelling right now. So you cannot turn on the TV, right, and not see a Geico ad, a Nationwide ad, a Mayhem Allstate ad, a State Farm ad, right? Well, let me point out something that maybe for the sophisticated marketers that you guys are, you probably already realize this to some extent, but each one of them is pressing a different kind of influence trigger with the audience, right? They've carved out very specific stories, and they're trying to shine a light on a very specific influence trigger to try to get people to log in and buy insurance from them. So they're not all the same. They're each trying to be very different. In the case of Nationwide, how many people have seen the vanishing deductible advertisements? Good friend of mine is actually responsible for that advertisement. It's very, very successful. What they've targeted is Nationwide has always been on your side, right? Their brand positioning has always been about, we care about you, we care about your family, we care about your assets, we take care of you, right? So the whole concept of the vanishing deductible story is that if you're really taking care of me, why do I have this big boulder hanging over me that if I have one accident, you're going to charge me, you're going to raise my rates. Or that my deductible is going to, even if I have an accident, I've never gotten an accident in 10 years, I have this massive deductible that I have to be responsible for. They're clearly saying, look, we care about you. When you interact with us, if you make a claim, if you've been a good customer, deductible is vanishing, right? By contrast, think about what Allstate's doing. Allstate, and this is again a hugely successful campaign right now. I argue that probably any one of you, when you turn on the TV, you see a Mayhem ad, or if you open up a print magazine. You'll see a Mayhem advertisement today. Mayhem's all about a violation of justice. You know, it's the teenage girl who's texting while she's driving, and she runs into the car in the parking lot and goes off in her pink, you know, Escalade or whatever she's driving. It's really shining a light on Allstate. Someone has to protect you from the injustices of society. Mayhem's out there. Allstate protects you from mayhem like him, right? Again, the interaction is very clear and very clear story. What does Progressive do? What's Flo all about? I would argue that Flo is all about social. She's all about what's everybody else doing. You've probably seen the commercial where, you know, she's hiding behind a building and some guys are talking about, you know, insurance, and she's trying to get them to come over here and let me show you what I got. Let me show you what we can do for you, right? Our rates are better. Look at our rates versus their rates. Progressive's story from day one has been, we give the best rates, but we also give you visibility to everybody's rates. So you can see what everybody else is getting, right? That's considered a trigger around social influence. Framing cues. Geico, I think, is brilliant at this. Geico actually builds more stories than just one I'm going to talk about today, but what is Geico's tagline? Anybody? 15 minutes, I can save you 15% on car insurance, right? That's a framing cue. Do you get the gist? right? You give me 15 minutes, I'll give you 15%. Real simple story, but it's also very compelling. And it goes to a pain point that a lot of people have, which is switching car insurance can be a hassle. They take the hassle out of it, right? If you notice, Esurance now is going with a counter to this. They're also doing a framing cue, which is, if you're online, why does it take 15 minutes? We can do it in 3 minutes. That's their story, right? So it's basically the gist of framing up the problem and making the problem go away. The last one, and this is one of my favorite ones, is the most, obviously when you interview people about car insurance and what do they like and dislike about it, it's kind of a necessary evil. You can't drive without it, right? So you got to have it. But the reality is the number one issue is actually not so much the purchase of insurance. The number one issue is when you file a claim, what a hassle it is to get paid. So what State Farm has done, their focus on their story is when something happens, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Boop, and your agent's there to help navigate with you through the problem. So with the bears attacking the car, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, and boop, we're back in the office, right? So that's the gist, is we're trying to address that frustration point around the car insurance usage experience. How am I doing with you guys? Tracking? All right, we're going to go through a couple more examples. But before we do that, I wanted to just make another plug for one of my favorite authors. And this, I think, is particularly important for those of you that are looking to develop campaigns or stories for your local markets. Don't underestimate the power of pull. And I would highly recommend this book. The gist of it is that it kind of goes to the theory of people support what they help to create. Right? And I know I heard one of the stations in the opening comments that talked about getting some of their viewers or getting some of the people in their community to actually tell stories about their experience with PBS. And I know that there's a number of assets that are going to be talked about later today that are available to you from PBS to essentially tell great stories. I think the trick here is that we have to begin to turn the model around and stop thinking in terms of targeting audience members or the whole concept of targeting in a pull-based model is a little bit backwards, right? What we really want to be thinking about is how can we give the audience the tools they need so they can be great creators. They can be an extended part of our community, extended part of our network. And I'm not saying everyone's going to become a film producer like the Doritos guys, but I do think that there's got to be ways for people to participate and engage with the brand on their terms, not necessarily only our terms. So let me give you a great example of this. And for those of you that know Andrea Kozlow in Arlington, the brand director there, Andrea worked at Red Cross and actually worked on this particular campaign that I love. I think it's a great example of what a nonprofit can do to essentially engage their constituency, right? Not target their audience, but engage their constituency in a very proactive and powerful way. So let me show you this clip and then we'll talk about it for a couple minutes.
It's been therapeutic to record what I go through on a day-to-day basis.
I just remember thinking, what am I going to do? I have a newborn. I can't lose my wife.
What they did for me was give me that break to be able to get it together.
Hi. Comfort to me is knowing that out there, her life still goes on, and those recipients.
And once you hit rock bottom, there's only one way to go from there.
People know that there is always hope.
Regardless of where you're at in your life, you just don't know what's going to happen or who's going to be there to help you.
It still hurts, and I just want it to be okay.
You gave me life.
I looked down at my hands and realized I'm doing CPR.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this guy.
There's a lesson to be learned. Life is short. Make it worthwhile.
Can you see me?
It's just a great example of how to create a pull model, right? Tell the story from the perspective of the audience member. And these are real people that have been impacted, whose lives have been impacted by disasters, by issues with blood, by issues with life-saving technique, CPR. And it's just a great way to put a face to the brand and what the brand actually does without being kind of, patting yourself on the back for all the great things that you do. I'm going to go through a couple more things. I had, like Jonah, I think I prepared enough material here to talk for about 3 days. So I'm going to go through a couple things quickly, but I wanted to point out we do have some sessions tomorrow and an open space session tomorrow afternoon. So even though I'm going to kind of skirt through some things here at the end fairly quickly, I'll be around for the rest of the time that we have together, and I'll be able to go through this in more detail with you. I do want to show you, I've got one clip from my favorite brand. And I think this brand really embodies, when you get it right, when it all comes together, this is what it should look and feel like. So let me play the Chick-fil-A clip, and then I'll give you some takeaways, and we'll wrap up.
From a customer standpoint, you really never know what's happening with them. They could be on cloud 9 and just as excited as can be, or they could just be having the worst day ever. So you never know what type of impact you're having.
In March of 2009, I left work and went to the airport in Raleigh to help my daughter Laura with both of her kids, because we were dropping Kevin off at the airport to leave to go to Afghanistan for a year.
I was overwhelmed. That was the first time he had ever been deployed. I mean, he had been on like short trips to train here and there, but nothing for a year. So it was the first time I didn't know what to expect.
And so we stopped at the Chick-fil-A in Durham, North Carolina.
The kids were hungry. I had a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old, and well, the 8-month-old didn't eat anything but baby food. I had set the baby food right in front of Luke, and as soon as I set it in front and turned the other way, he wiped it right off the table.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw this customer. She had just sat down, and baby food jar just went flying off the table. I think the kid or somebody had knocked it off.
And so she looks at me and she said, "What am I going to do? That was the only jar of baby food I had with me."
The mom and the daughter, they exchanged a couple words, and somewhere in there I think I heard that was their last baby food jar. That was the only thing they were going to be able to feed their child.
The manager had came over and started cleaning it up and asked what kind of baby food it was, because they were going to send one of their employees over and get baby food for him.
So Terry had come up, she was working in the dining room, and we looked at each other, and so she just took off. She went and grabbed her purse. I don't think she even did a payout or anything, just took off and went and came back with some baby food.
When I came in and handed her the baby food,
She was very surprised and I guess amazed that we would go do that.
I mean, within 5 minutes, she had like 2 or 3 jars of baby food at our table.
I had no idea that this woman had just dropped her husband off at the airport, who had just been deployed to Afghanistan, and so she was having a hard time. And you just never know what people are going through when they walk in the door.
Hey, look at the impact that we just had, and look at the story that was happening up until this point, and we had no clue that was taking place, but just from the simple action, this is the impact that we had on her.
People have become raving fans of Chick-fil-A, and in a highly competitive industry like fast food, the second mile service story that you just heard and kind of the capabilities that they embody in their people, in the restaurant, and the way they serve is something that nobody can really replicate in the industry today, and that's why they've been so successful. Let me just jump right to some key takeaways. I know we covered a lot in a short period of time, and like I said, I'll be around to answer questions this week as well, but here are the things that I would suggest just to wrap things up. One is, as you embark on, or if you're already in storytelling and you're continuing your experience in building stories for your local stations, think about first about how do you bring meaning to your myth, right? I was very moved by Kat's comments this morning about the history of PBS and staking our claim, right? And I think that's where it all begins. The challenge to you is, how do you make it local? How do you bring it to life in meaningful ways for your community and for your constituents that you serve today? The second thing is, I would challenge you all. I mean, I don't think PBS is the hero. I don't think Downton Abbey is the hero. I don't think Sherlock's the hero. I think the hero is your audience and the benefits that the audience gets from having PBS serve them in that local community. So find ways to make your audience the hero and you be the mentor. You provide guidance. Emotion is at the core of everything that we do. Anger, laughter, humor, it's what motivates people. We're all humans. All of your audience members are consumers just like you are. And so never forget that it's not enough just to make them cry or laugh or jump for joy. You've got to give them a logical action step, influence them to take action. And again, not on every story, but when you're thinking about going into pledge, or when you're thinking about creating a new promotion for a program, think about how you get people into action, not just motivate them through emotion. This I cannot underscore. It's the number one kind of key distinction of this talk today. Don't tell stories, live into your story. You saw the Chick-fil-A example. It's a great embodiment of that. That's stuff you can't train people, right? That's just being good servant leaders in a business. And that's what great storytelling is all about, is making sure that you live into that experience, that you're not just telling, a circa 1960s advertisement that we're going to make everyone's lives better, easier, cheaper. And then I was going to pick up on something. I'll talk about this offline if anybody's interested, but there's a fabulous section in Jonah's book where he talks about the Trojan horse, and he mentioned it literally for just a couple minutes today. Read that section, because the takeaway from it is stories are Trojan horses, right? Stories on their surface unpack a myth, explain, bring meaning, hopefully get people to act. But don't forget to put the meaning and the hidden message inside, that message in the bottle. A Trojan horse can't be overly obvious. The art of storytelling is getting your message across without hitting people in the face with it. And I'd encourage you to read more about the concept of a Trojan horse story. With that, I'll wrap up and open it up for any questions.
All right, who's got questions? Anybody questions? Let me hit you with a quick question, just because this always hits me in presentations like this. You did a great job, by the way. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Give it up. So my question, we saw a lot of really awesome brand stories today, and some of the stations obviously have a little bit less money than Doritos to get out there in front, so we're not going to probably be doing Super Bowl ads. Thoughts on some of the things you talked about today and how to do this on small budgets, no budgets?
Yeah. Well, I think two things. That's a great question, because this is there's two ways to look at this, right? Obviously, nobody in the room has the media budget buy of a Frito-Lay, so I'm not advocating that you go out and do Super Bowl ads. But by the same token, most of the things that I showed you today, the production side of it were shoestring budgets. The Red Cross story, that was a very low budget initiative. And think about the wealth, the ROI on the content that was generated from that effort far exceeded the cost of production. So don't get too caught up in the trap of the media buy side of it, because I think that's clearly, you're not a Doritos, you're not even a Chick-fil-A in terms of media spend. But keep in mind that when you turn your audience into the hero, when the stories are being delivered and developed by other people other than yourself, the word of mouth kicks in. The fact that Jonah put on there, which is word of mouth, what was it, Bill? Twice as effective as sales, right? McKinsey data point, whatever. That in and of itself should demonstrate to you that if you get this right, the return on your investment is significant. And the cost to produce can actually be maybe lower than what some things you're doing today. So,
great, thank you. Other questions? Anybody? Questions for Dave? You did a great job, Dave. I'm not seeing questions.
Thank you.
All right, folks, let's give it up for Dave.